was standing in the hallway of my parents' house with my coat still in my hands when I heard my father say into the phone, "She won't be coming. It's better this way." He was talking about me, and he didn't even lower his voice. I froze, barely breathing, like the floor beneath me might betray me if I moved. The house was quiet, but his words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. He wasn't asking. He wasn't explaining. He was stating a fact, one where I no longer existed. My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 27 years old, and this happened in the spring, in Palo Alto, California. In the same house where I grew up, but where I felt less welcome with every passing year. I had come home for a few days. No big reason, just because it had been a while. I didn't know that this time, my presence itself would be treated like a problem. My older brother, Ethan, had always been the pride of our family. Always. He had a way of making people like him without trying. Teachers adored him. Coaches trusted him. Parents of his friends praised him. His mistakes were called growing pains. Mine were treated like proof that something about me was fundamentally wrong. Ethan was sitting in the living room, relaxed, confident, scrolling through his phone. He looked like the world had been designed with him in mind. He didn't notice me. Or maybe he just didn't think he needed to. When my father finished the call and saw me, he didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked relieved. "Claire," he said calmly, "sit down. We need to talk." My mother joined us right away. She was holding a dish towel, twisting it in her hands the way she always did when she was nervous. They sat across from me, shoulder to shoulder, like a united front. "This is a complicated situation," my mother began. "For Ethan," my father added. I stayed quiet. "There are some very important people coming to see him soon," my father said. "People from a different world," my mother added softly. "They matter," he finished. I already knew where this was going. "We've decided," my father said after a brief pause, "that it would be better if you didn't take part in this meeting. Not that you wouldn't come, not that we're worried about you, just it would be better." "Why?" I asked, even though the answer had lived inside me for years. My mother looked away. "You're different," she said quietly, "and we don't want anything uncomfortable." I smiled automatically. That was what I always did when I was being made smaller. "You understand," my father added. "This is an important moment for your brother. Don't ruin it." I stood up, picked up my coat, said it was fine, said I understood. They exhaled in relief. But there was something they didn't know. There was already something in this house that didn't fit their version of me. Something they hadn't noticed. Something they had chosen to overlook. I didn't know yet how it would come out. I only knew that the moment they decided I was better hidden would become the beginning of the end of their illusion. And it all started with one small detail I noticed later that evening in the living room. A framed photograph. One I had never seen there before. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was angry, and not because I was crying. It was because, for the first time in a long while, something inside me finally stopped trying to earn a seat at that table. By morning, the house was back to normal. My mom was making coffee. My dad was reading the news. Ethan came downstairs with his phone in his hand and didn't even look at me. "You're up early," he said casually. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. He smiled. "You should spend more time thinking about your future instead of getting caught up in drama," he said, like he was doing me a favor. I didn't respond. To Ethan, I had always been the one who was still figuring things out, the one who needed advice, the one who didn't need to be taken seriously. And he never noticed how easily he borrowed our parents' words, their tone, their quiet dismissal. At breakfast, the conversation drifted back to the upcoming visit. Names, plans, small details. I sat there like part of the furniture. "You understand how important this is for Ethan?" my mom said without looking at me. "Yes," I answered. "I understand." And I meant it. I really did. That afternoon, I went for a walk around the neighborhood, the same streets from my childhood, the same houses, the same faces, and the same feeling that I had always been slightly out of place. When I came back, there were new things in the living room. Fresh flowers, folders stacked neatly, gift boxes. And then I saw it. The photograph. Framed. Sitting on the dresser near the window. I stepped closer, assuming it was just another family picture. But it wasn't. It wasn't from our life, not from school, not from a vacation. I stared at it longer than I should have. Something tightened in my chest. I knew I had seen that photo before. Not here, not in this house. My mom walked in and noticed me standing there. "It's a nice photo, isn't it?" she said. "Someone gave it to us recently." "Who?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She shrugged. "Friends, just for decoration." I nodded, but my hands were shaking. That evening, I went into my old bedroom, opened the closet, pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were things I hadn't kept for anyone else, only for myself. And among them was something that made my heart start racing. I sat on the bed, staring at it, and realized something all at once. If that photograph was here, then someone was already much closer to the truth than my parents realized. And if they were so afraid that I would ruin the impression, then very soon they were going to have to explain far more than they were prepared for. Because the next conversation in this house wasn't going to be about Ethan. The next 2 days passed as if I didn't exist in that house. No one asked for my help. No one asked for my opinion. No one included me in conversations. I became a shadow. And for the first time in my life, I didn't mind it. Because when people stop noticing you, you start noticing everything. I watched my father check his phone every few minutes, his movements sharp and restless. I watched my mother choose her words too carefully, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I watched Ethan move through the house with a tension I had never seen before. Not the tension of someone under pressure, but the tension of someone afraid something might slip. He started paying closer attention to details, and he became colder toward me. "How long are you planning to stay?" he asked one evening without looking at me. "I don't know," I said. "Well, this isn't exactly the best time," he added. I nodded slightly. This wasn't just discomfort, it was anticipation, like they knew something I didn't. Or worse, like they were afraid I knew more than they thought. That night, I pulled the box of old things out again. I went through it slowly, carefully, like I was handling something fragile. I wasn't planning to do anything. I just needed to know I wasn't imagining this, that the unease had a reason. And then I heard it. Voices. Low, muffled. Coming from my parents' bedroom. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, honestly. But my name cut through the door so clearly that I froze. "Does she suspect anything?" my mother asked. "I don't know," my father replied. "She's always been more observant than she looks." A pause. "We can't let her be around," my mother said. "That's why," my father answered slowly. "We need to keep her away, at least for now." I stepped back, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. What were they talking about? And why didn't it sound like concern? But fear. The next day, I saw the photograph in the living room again. The same one. And this time I was sure. It wasn't there by accident. I stepped closer, studied the details, the people in the background, the location. And suddenly, I realized the problem wasn't that I had seen this photo before. The problem was where I had seen it. My breathing caught. At that exact moment, Ethan walked into the room. He saw what I was looking at. And for the first time in years, I didn't see arrogance on his face. I saw panic. "Don't touch that," he said sharply, stepping toward me. "Why?" I asked calmly. He opened his mouth, closed it, ran a hand through his hair. "Just not now," he said more quietly. "You don't understand what you could get yourself into." I stepped back slowly, but inside me, something finally settled into place. They weren't afraid I would ruin anything. They were afraid I would remember something. And in that moment, I understood something else too. This house wasn't held together by love or pride. It was held together by a secret. And very soon, someone wasn't going to be able to carry it anymore. I didn't understand why that photograph was sitting in the living room until the next morning. My mom was on the phone, sounding almost excited, and she didn't even notice I was nearby. "Yes, Yes, it's them. Such lovely people. So down to earth for their level, she said, smiling like someone could see her through the call. When she hung up, I asked casually, like it didn't matter, "Was that the family who's coming?" She lit up. "Yes, Ethan's fiance's parents. They sent us that photo from an event they attended together. I thought it would look nice in the living room, a sign of respect." There it was. That picture wasn't a memory, and it wasn't decoration. It was a signal, a message that said, "We understand what this means. We're ready. We belong in this conversation." I stepped closer to the frame with that in mind. Suddenly, everything looked different. It wasn't just a group of people. It was people with status. People my parents were terrified of disappointing. And me, I was in the photo in a way they weren't used to seeing me. Not in a worn sweater, not with tired eyes after a long drive, not as the one who still hasn't figured it out. In that picture, I looked composed, quiet, put together. I wasn't front and center. I was off to the side, exactly where they'd never been trained to notice me. That night, I went back into my old room and pulled out the box again. This time, I looked through it without panic. The photographs inside were from the same time period, just taken from the inside. Different angles, different moments. There was nothing flashy in them. Just me, working, sitting at a table, standing nearby, and some of the same people from that framed photo. It wasn't a second world. It was the same world my parents were now trying to invite into their home through Ethan. And that was why Ethan was tense. He knew those people weren't coming for charm, not for confident speeches, not for stories about potential. They were coming for substance. At dinner, he talked more than he needed to. He joked too loudly. He interrupted. He over-explained simple things. Someone who feels steady doesn't do that. Someone who's afraid of failing does. "You understand how important this is," he said to me later when we ended up alone in the kitchen. "For you," I replied. He snapped his eyes toward me. "Just don't get involved, okay?" And suddenly I understood. My parents wanted that photo in the living room so they could look worthy. Ethan wanted me out of sight because he was terrified of contrast. And me? I was the only person in that house who didn't have to prove anything. I didn't need to reveal the truth. I didn't need to ruin anyone's plans. All I had to do was let everyone play their part. Because for the first time in my life, the conditions were equal. And Ethan had never known what to do with that. I wasn't in the house at all that morning. My parents insisted I leave before the guests arrived. No argument, no explanation. They made it clear, calmly and firmly, that my presence wasn't appropriate right now. I didn't fight it. When I left, the house looked perfect. The flowers were arranged just right. The tablecloth was freshly pressed. And the photograph in the living room, that same one, sat in a place of honor on the dresser, as if it had always belonged there. The guests arrived around noon. Olivia's parents were exactly as I'd been told they'd be. Composed, confident, attentive to details. And with them was Olivia herself. Calm, beautiful, wearing that easy smile of someone used to the world adjusting to her pace. Ethan was at his best. He spoke with confidence, listened carefully, joked just enough to seem warm, but never careless. He was the version of himself my parents loved to present to others. Olivia's parents were pleased. They liked the house. They liked the atmosphere. And they especially liked that my parents had placed their photograph in the living room, the one from that business event. "That's very thoughtful," Olivia's mother said, pausing by the dresser. It meant a lot to us to see that. She didn't study the details. To her, it was a gesture, a sign of respect, proof that they were being taken seriously. Lunch passed smoothly. The conversation was steady, mature, about plans, about the future, about possibilities. Ethan looked promising, exactly the way they wanted to see him. As evening approached, the guests prepared to leave. The goodbyes were warm, unhurried, filled with the kind of phrases that leave you feeling like this is only the beginning. And that was the exact moment I came back. I was certain everyone had already left. I planned to step inside quickly, grab my things, and go. I didn't even enter the house. I stopped at the gate, and we saw each other at the same time. Olivia's mother noticed me first. Her gaze passed over me, then suddenly stopped. She took a step forward. "Excuse me," she said slowly. "Is that you?" I didn't have time to answer. "You were with us back then," she continued, more certain now. "At that meeting. You gave us the tour of the company." Her husband looked at me closely, and recognition appeared in his eyes. "Yes," he said. "You explained how the system works. You answered all of our key questions." Silence settled in. Olivia looked at me with curiosity. My parents, with confusion, and Ethan, with a tension he could no longer hide. "We were so happy when we saw our photograph in your living room," Olivia's mother said. "It was really kind." She smiled at me, genuinely. No one raised their voice, no one demanded explanations, and yet something in the air cracked. "Well, we should be going," she said after a brief pause. They got into the car and drove away. We stayed standing there in the driveway, the same place that had looked perfect just minutes earlier. And I knew this much. The plans hadn't collapsed. They had simply stopped being certain. I walked into the house silently, grabbed my bag from the bench by the door, and left. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I suddenly understood something very clearly. The moment I started explaining, the conversation would turn into their feelings, their embarrassment, how uncomfortable this was for them, and how I was supposed to make it better. I didn't want to make anything better anymore. Behind me, my father called my name, sharp, almost commanding. "Claire, wait." I didn't stop. My mom said something too, but her words blurred into a nervous whisper. Ethan stood there like his feet were glued to the driveway. He didn't joke. He didn't step in. He didn't try to save the moment with confidence like he always did. I opened my car door, tossed my bag onto the passenger seat, and only then turned back. We looked at each other for a few seconds. My parents, confused and afraid. Ethan, tense in a way he could no longer hide. "What was that?" my mother finally whispered. I could have answered. I could have ended everything with a single sentence. Instead, I said, "It's late. I'm leaving." And I drove away. I didn't come back to the house that night. I checked into a small hotel closer to downtown, not because I had nowhere to go, but because I needed silence. A place where my heart could beat without carrying anyone else's expectations. My phone kept ringing. First my mom, then my dad, then Ethan. I didn't answer a single call. And the strangest part? It wasn't hard. In the past, I would have felt guilty. I would have wondered if maybe I really had done something wrong. If maybe I should go back and explain, smooth things over. But this time, there was only one feeling inside me. They had finally seen that something existed outside their script. And now, they were scared. By morning, the fallout started to seep in. Not through words, through behavior. My mom texted, "Your dad is panicking. Ethan's shut down. Please call." I didn't. An hour later, my dad wrote, "We don't understand what happened. Please explain." I still didn't respond. Then Ethan texted. His message was the longest and the fakest. "You caused a strange scene last night. They don't know what to think now. If you just say it was a misunderstanding, we can fix this. Don't turn this into a problem." I read it twice. So that was his version of events. I was the problem. Not the years of exaggeration, not the way my parents erased me from the room so I wouldn't ruin the impression. Not the fact that their perfect image had cracked. The problem was me, because I showed up in a frame where I wasn't supposed to exist. I didn't reply to him either. That evening, I came back. Not into the house, but to the parking spot across the street. I just sat in my car, trying to gather myself. And that's when I saw something that mattered. Ethan was pacing the driveway with his phone pressed to his ear. His voice carried through the closed window, sharp, strained. "Olivia, listen. No, it's not what you think. She was just there by coincidence. Yes, I know how it sounds. No, I'll explain everything." He stopped, dragged a hand down his face, like he was wiping control off it. Then he spoke quieter. But I still caught it. "You can't do this. We had an understanding. Your father respects me." A pause. And then, almost a whisper, "Please, don't do this right now." I sat there, motionless, because that was it. The first real consequence. Not a scandal, not an explosion, just the world, quietly, efficiently, beginning to unwind everything he had wrapped so carefully. I watched my brother and thought, for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say to make it work. His charm was hitting a wall, and this wall didn't care how confident he sounded. I started the engine and drove away before he noticed me. I wasn't going to take part in their family crisis meeting. Not this time. Let them guess, let them build theories, let them feel, for once, what it's like not to have the full picture. Because the most painful kind of revenge isn't destruction, it's stepping aside and letting someone reveal exactly who they are. And judging by the way Ethan begged her not to do this right now, his truth was already knocking at the door. After that meeting, life in Ethan's house didn't stop. It just shifted. Olivia's parents didn't show any dissatisfaction openly. They remained polite, correct, consistent, but they started checking, not out of suspicion, out of caution. Ethan had talked a lot about his projects, about ideas, about big potential. Olivia's father reached out to people Ethan had mentioned by name. It turned out some of those projects had already been shut down. Others weren't profitable. A few existed only as slide decks and conversations. No one said Ethan was lying. The facts simply didn't support his words. Then they looked into the family. Not gossip. Details. How long the daughter had lived separately. Why she wasn't present at the introduction. How often the family actually spent time together. They learned that the daughter hadn't lived with her parents for years, that the relationship was strained, that her presence in the family was selective, controlled. That mattered to them. They weren't looking for a perfect image. They were looking for stability, not performance. Honesty. There was one more detail they didn't overlook. They didn't like that the daughter had been deliberately asked not to attend, not because of logistics, but because she was inconvenient. To them, that meant only one thing. This family cared more about appearances than transparency. The decision wasn't made overnight, but it was inevitable. Meetings stopped. Plans were no longer discussed. Olivia began to distance herself. No explanations, no accusations. Just a quiet conclusion. This story wasn't moving forward. Ethan realized it gradually. First, a canceled visit. Then shorter replies. Then a conversation with no emotion in it at all. Her parents believed their daughter deserved someone whose reality matched his words. And that was the end of it. At the same time, Ethan started looking for a job. His resume changed. The bold claims disappeared. What remained were general skills and promises of fast learning. By then, I was already back in my city, back at work, back in meetings, back in systems that don't depend on family narratives. One morning, HR forwarded me a resume with a short note. Referred candidate, strong communication skills, no concrete case studies. I looked at the name, Ethan. I wasn't surprised, and I didn't feel angry. I understood one thing very clearly. He was about to step into a space where roles don't matter, and where everyone starts on equal ground. I closed the file and sent it back to HR without a single note. Invite the candidate for an interview, I said calmly. Standard procedure. No special conditions. No hints. No involvement. I didn't want to be his advantage, and I didn't want to be his trap. I wanted to be the system. The interview wasn't conducted by me. It was handled by the department lead and HR. Exactly the way it was for everyone else. Ethan spoke confidently. He held himself well. He knew how to sound convincing. There wasn't much substance, but it was enough to pass the first stage. The company needed people, and he knew how to present himself. He was offered the position. When I received the confirmation, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no doubt. It was simply the beginning of a process. Ethan was genuinely happy. He called our parents as soon as he received the official email. I got the job, he said. A big corporation, international. To them, it sounded like justice restoring itself. I told you, my mother said. You always land on your feet. They don't take just anyone at that level, my father added. That says a lot. They were talking about his future again, about his career, about how he would prove himself. None of them asked what the role actually involved. Once again, The company name mattered more than the substance. The first few weeks at work weren't a disaster, but they weren't a triumph either. He went through onboarding, received tasks, learned the internal systems. He told himself it was temporary, that the real momentum would come later. But later never came. This company didn't confuse confidence with competence, it didn't reward good wording, and it didn't operate on charm. Tasks had clear outcomes, deadlines had exact dates. Performance was simple: done or not done. Ethan fell behind. He submitted partial work, shifted responsibility onto others, calling it team collaboration. He expected someone to cover for him. No one criticized him, no one embarrassed him, no one singled him out. They simply documented. After 1 month, he noticed he wasn't included in important tasks. After 2, that no one asked for his input. After 3, that he was exactly where he had started. No movement, no growth, no future plans, the kind he loved talking about. One Friday afternoon, he received a message in the internal chat. "Please come to the director's office at 4:00 p.m. Ethan smiled. He assumed this was finally it. The conversation about development, about the next step, maybe even a promotion. He straightened his back, adjusted his jacket, walked down the hallway with the same familiar feeling that had always saved him. I know how to make the right impression. He knocked. "Come in," a voice said. Ethan opened the door and stopped. I was sitting behind the director's desk, not as his sister, not as part of a family story, but as the person who makes decisions. I looked at him calmly and said, "Sit down. We need to talk." He sat down slowly, never taking his eyes off me. "What are you doing here?" he finally asked. Do you work here?" I didn't answer right away. I simply opened the folder in front of me and rested my hands on the table. "No," I said calmly. "I don't work here. I run this company, and I'm the one in charge." He blinked, as if he hadn't heard me. "What did you just say?" "This is my company, Ethan," I repeated evenly. "I founded it. I make the decisions. And you are an employee who doesn't meet my standards." The silence dropped instantly. You did this on purpose?" His voice cracked. "You lured me in here?" "No," I shook my head. "You came here on your own. I simply didn't stop life from putting you in the same conditions I lived in." He clenched his hands. "So this is revenge?" "No," I said. "These are equal rules, the same ones you've never had to face." I slid the documents toward him. "Based on your performance, your contract is terminated. No drama, no personal attacks. You didn't show judgment, responsibility, or results." He looked up at me. "Do our parents know?" "They already do," I answered. "And now they know something else too. That the success they were proud of was an illusion, and the person they spent years overlooking was the real thing." He stood up without a word. "You could have told me earlier." "And you could have listened," I replied, "but you chose not to." He walked out. Later, our parents tried to talk to me. They asked, they explained, they said they didn't understand. But there was no conflict left between us. There was something worse. Distance. I didn't plan this revenge. I simply stopped explaining myself. And that turned out to be enough for everyone to end up exactly where they belonged. Now I want to ask you, do you think this was fair? Or did I go too far? Let me know what you think about this ending in the comments below, please.